There's been quite a lot of discussion about what to do when going for a COVID test in the Isle of Man, especially in a taxi, and there are some regulations in place, but things aren't quite necessarily going to plan. With me is Mike Birchall, who looks after, from a union point of view, the taxis here on the Isle of Man. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, we have about 70 members on the Isle of Man who we represent in problems within the trade in all matters, really.
Okay, let's deal with this thing then. You get picked up in a taxi, you're meant to have ventilation in there. You go, and it can be obviously much more than 15 minutes sometimes, I suppose, if there's a queue there. And you've got all the sort of protocols to follow about mask wearing, the person in the back has to sit opposite, and that sort of thing. But there's been issues.
Yeah, there has. I mean, we have clear protocols which have been distributed to all the taxi operators on the island via the RTLC, who's the governing body, and we have obviously passed them on to all our members as well separately, and the main taxi bases on the island. So all protocol, everybody knows the protocols, and we're all following them exactly the way that we should be,
So take us through some of the things. I mean, ventilation, what's that mean? Having a window open, fully open, or just a little bit open for starters?
Just a little bit open. You're meant to have ventilation through the car so that air blows through the car whilst you've got passengers in. I tend to open all of the windows and just leave them open for about an inch and a half, just to get ventilation through, and it blows through any supposedly any viruses that should be in the car. I suppose that's the reason for it.
Are you all masked up in the car? I mean, the passenger obviously does. Do you mask up as well, the driver?
Yeah, I mean, up until recently, we were not required to wear masks, and it wasn't advisory to wear masks. And at the start of this new lockdown, obviously we were told that all drivers should be wearing masks as well. Up until that point, any passengers that were being brought back from the airport or going for COVID tests had to wear masks, and they had to sit diagonally in the back of the car. If there was only one passenger, if there were two passengers, then obviously one sat on one side of the car and one sat on the other. So you kept the distances as far as possible.
I believe it's maybe a 15-minute sort of maximum, but you can't do that necessarily in a taxi because you could be in a huge queue sometimes, I guess, at the testing centre.
No, we were made exempt to the 15-minute maximum as long as we obey the regulations and the guidelines that we were given, which is wearing masks, ventilation in the car, cleaning the car thoroughly afterwards, etc., etc. I mean, I myself personally, before I let a passenger into the car who's going for a COVID test or coming back from the airport, I have hand gel in the boot, and I make them put hand gel on their hands to clean their hands thoroughly before they get in. So as long as we follow those regulations, the 15 minutes doesn't supposedly apply to us.
And once the whole journey's over, do you have to do any special cleaning of the taxi?
Yeah, the taxi is cleaned thoroughly afterwards. All the grips, the handles, anywhere that the passenger could have touched, the seats, the seatbelt buckles, that kind of thing. So that the car is clean with anti back wipes after the journey has ceased. Okay,
well, I said at the beginning some things have gone slightly wrong in places. I think you've got two examples of things you need to sort out, isn't there?
Yeah, I have. I mean, my problem really, or our problem, is lack of communication from public health, from 111. We had a case now 2 weeks ago, so before lockdown, where a driver took somebody for a COVID test. The COVID test came back positive, and public health rang the driver up and talked to the driver, and the driver was then taken off the road. Now, the reason that the driver was given that he was taken off the road was because the passenger was longer than 15 minutes in the car, which we were assured did not apply to us. So I got straight onto this, and through a few different people, I managed to get an answer back from public health saying that he wasn't taken off the road because the passenger was more than 15 minutes in the car. He was taken off the road because the car wasn't ventilated, at which point I got back in touch with the driver and was assured that wasn't the case. So I then asked public health to review the telephone conversation that was made because they're all recorded. I await a reply to that request to this day. Last Friday, I received a telephone call a week ago saying they would reply via email. I still haven't had an email. I as far as I'm concerned, the driver's done nothing wrong. He's followed all protocols, and he's now lost 2 weeks' revenue because of this, which is totally out of order, really.
This is coming down to communication then, by sounds of it. You're just not getting a response.
Communication, I can't get a response from them. Then we have a second case, which was Tuesday this week, where a driver picked up somebody who'd returned to the island the day before, and he took them up to the Grandstand for a COVID test. After the COVID test was finished and he was dropping the passenger off, he requested that the passenger contact him if the test were to come back positive. And he got a phone call that evening saying that the test was positive, and Public Health had apparently told him on the phone not to contact the taxi company directly or the taxi driver directly. They would do the contact tracing. Well, we're now on Friday, 72 hours later, and the driver still hasn't been contacted by Public Health, which I find a bit of a shambles. They should at least be asking the question as well, were all regulations adhered to, and giving the driver some advice as well on what he should be doing and how he should be going on.
Yes, because you need to know how much of a risk that driver was under because that person was positive. And obviously you were keeping to the protocols, but there's obviously, like in every case, a risk factor, isn't there?
Well, there is, yes, and communication is the key to this. That's the point, and I would have assumed that Public Health would have liked to have verified with the driver that all regulations were adhered to and that the risk to the general public was being kept to a minimum, which I am perfectly 100% sure that all regulations have been adhered to and that the protocols have been followed.
So assuming if they had done the tracking, that driver would then be presumably put up for a test themselves.
I'm not sure what the situation is with that. I would imagine that they would say it's a very, very low risk as long as the driver kept away from the passenger. They were both wearing masks and the car was cleaned afterwards. So I don't know whether the driver would have been put up for a test or not, or whether they would have just said, should you show symptoms? But you would have thought they would have at least wanted to establish that the risk was minimum.
Well, let's see if you get any response now. To finish with, how's this going for you guys? Because obviously traffic is probably lower overall again, but this is an essential service. Because people can't just walk up and have a test. They have to. If they don't drive themselves, they do have to get in a cab, don't they?
They do have to take a taxi for a test if they don't drive themselves. That's the only route in. There's a lot of drivers that won't actually take people through the test station for personal reasons, medical reasons. Maybe they might be vulnerable themselves. That's been the case over the last few months. A lot of those drivers since lockdown, they've obviously ceased operating. They've had to, because they can't put themselves at risk. There's very little work about. We're trying to provide a public service and keep things going. Anybody that doesn't have transport that wants to go and do their shopping, we're there to help them. Anybody that needs to get to a hospital appointment, etc., and of course we're there to take people through the COVID test station should they need to. But we would request better communication from Public Health in future.
And is there a surcharge for this? Because obviously you have to deep clean or whatever afterwards each journey. And do you charge while you're sitting in a queue waiting? Is the meter still running, all those sort of things?
The meter runs from the start of the journey to the finish of the journey. Some taxi firms and operators are charging a surcharge, I think, of £5 for cleaning the vehicle afterwards, depending on the length of the journey. Others I don't think are. I'm not really sure on that, but it's entirely up to the driver or the operator or the company whether they do that or not.
Well, there's enough people volunteering, but enough drivers doing their job to meet the demand at the moment?
At the moment there is, and we can only hope that it would stay that way. I would request better communication from Public Health, otherwise we're going to have less drivers that will be willing to put themselves at risk doing this kind of work in the coming weeks, and it's essential that we get these people through their tests,